Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Allison, and I'm your host for today's Nature Calls. I'm with the Nature Conservancy in Alabama, and today we're going to get down and dirty and talk about trash. But the first thing I want you to know is that we're recording this session. And secondly, that we're going to mute your microphone so that when we hear from our speaker, it'll be clear. And also, if you have a question, then just go down to the bottom of your screen and type it into the chat. And then afterwards, we'll have question and answer periods, and I'll field the questions. So please join in if you have a question, but do it via the chat. Now, we've received a lot of great comments about this program that we call Nature Calls. And Nature Calls is our attempt to get you out of the house and virtually into our conservation work around the state. And the program today is about 15 minutes long with another 15 minutes for questions and answers. And each Thursday at 3:00 p.m. Central Time, we'll feature a new conservation program. And so stay tuned. Now today, I'm pleased to introduce Caitlin Woodale, who is our intern, and she is going to talk about trash. So Caitlin, without further ado, get trashy.
Thank you, Olivia. Now don't try and steal my thunder with my jokes. There's just too many good ones here. Sorry, it keeps popping up. Someone wants to join. I will go ahead and start presenting anyway. Let me share my screen. Well, thank you all for joining me today and tuning in. Let me start my slideshow. Oh my gosh, it keeps canceling what I'm trying to do because of, all right, it's fine. I think we're all good now. All right. Thank you all for joining me in doing some trash talk on some trash. My name is Caitlin Woodale, and I am an intern with the Nature Conservancy of Alabama, the coastal office. I am currently attending the University of South Alabama, getting my master's in marine conservation and resource management. And this presentation is going to summarize some of the work I've done here at TNC in order to graduate with my master's. And it's going to consisted of some removal, cataloging, and assessment of marine debris. So we will start with a little bit on the project site in Bayou La Battery, and then we will we'll discuss some of the goals of the project. Then we will get a little bit briefly into the strategy of the project and why we chose that methodology. Then we can actually jump into the results, and then we will finish up with some future plans. So what are our next steps based off this project? Now, I hope you are all feeling sufficiently trashy because we're going to get wasted. Okay. Like that. Alrighty. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the parent project to mine, which is the Lightning Point Restoration Project in Bayou La Battery, Alabama. So it is basically the area where the Mississippi Sound and the Bayou La Battery intersect, sort of this whole area down here by the boat launch. However, my project is only focused on this area on the west side of the channel. It's in this green area, and the orange is actually where the debris was collected from. So if we zoom in on that like green square circle, this is what we were looking at. So this was in 2018, whereas the background is what it looks like today. And you can see this sort of outline, or this border here. It's pretty stark. This rectangle is called Alpha Site, and it was named by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers whenever they were dredging through this channel, and they used it as a dump site for their sediment. So all of their leftover dirt just got put right there in Alpha Site, and because of that, there really hasn't been any room for any sort of natural succession or any proper natural processes, including shoreline stabilization, fish nurseries, anything like that. The area was just like covered in invasive species, Phragmites, Nutria. We may have had some feral hogs out there, popcorn trees, all sorts of stuff that we are not a fan of. So part of the Lightning Point Restoration Project was actually to carve out these tidal creeks in this background picture. I won't get too much into that since that's not my part, but to restore some of the natural hydrology and geomorphology. However, before this construction ever began, when they were doing project planning in this area, TNC noticed that there was another problem that we had on our hands. And just so you know, this orange area, which is where the debris was collected, is roughly an acre. But yes, there was another problem. Can you guess? Trash. So there was so much trash accumulated that you could hardly even see the ground, as you can see in those two background pictures. And those are from 2018. And it was astonishing. It appeared that this area had been essentially funneling trash in there. So anytime any debris would pass by Alpha, it would sort of get funneled into this little marshy area right here. And of course, I'm sure y'all are familiar that Bayou La Batterie is a very industrial area, and a lot of the businesses are based right along the bayou. So this is just a quick Google map with all the business logos or business icons in there, and you can see how many are within proximity of that water. So any waste that ended up in the water, whether it was on purpose or not on purpose, will eventually float down and likely got funneled into Alpha. But regardless of how the trash got there, it had to go before, sorry, I don't know why those slides just went. Anyway, it had to go before construction could even commence. And so aside from just removing the debris to improve aesthetics of the area, which of course was an obvious benefit, we also wanted to restore and create habitats for important species and wildlife, like birds, as I know many of you are a fan of, and fish nurseries, which is extremely important for an area such as Bayou La Batterie that is so strongly tied to the seafood industry. And lastly, if possible, we wanted to try and identify some of the sources of this debris. And while that sounds sort of like, we're wanting to put blame or point fingers, that's not what that means. It's this way we could fine-tune any future community service or community outreach to the appropriate audiences. and really pinpoint some more practical solutions to this problem. And I'll sort of explain a little bit more in the next slide. Now, the strategy that we use, the protocol, is actually, it was provided by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and it's called the Escape Trash Assessment Protocol. And it is a guide on how to collect debris and catalog it in a way that it will be comparable and relevant in the future, and make sure that there's some sort of unified way of collecting this data. So this is just a screenshot of one of the Excel sheets that comes with the protocol, and pretty basic. I mean, down the left you've got your material types and then what the item is, and then up here we've got some of the variables that we were interested in. But what I want to point out is, let's see, yes, this area over here to the right in the circle on this auto analysis. So depending on what the item actually was, it was actually put into a industry category. So whether that was retail, food and beverage, other, other, or fishing and recreation, outdoor recreation. I think this quote from the protocol actually really sums up why it was chosen. And there's not been a uniform method to collect data on trash types, amounts, or what areas pose the greatest risks to humans and wildlife. This protocol provides an easy-to-use methodology for picking up the trash and cataloging it in a way that produces reliable data on the characteristics of trash, as well as the potential threats posed by the waste. So let's get into some totals. So after 2 weeks of hand picking through all of the debris, we then had to go and analyze it. I had to go analyze it. And in the end, we calculated that the total debris could have filled 2 cement mixing trucks and weighed about as much as an elephant, which is pretty staggering if you ask me. Down here in the bottom left, you can see the rest of the grand totals as far as quantity, weight, and volume go, per material type. Plastics were over 50% of the total quantity and the total volume of debris, which not only is that impressive, but even though it wasn't the heaviest material, that should make sense considering plastic's lightweight nature. 1,000 pounds of plastic is a lot of plastic. So there was definitely a staggering plastic influence here. And to sort of put that into a little bit of perspective, the collected paper could have filled 1.5 bathtubs, all of the paper that we collected, which is a decent amount of paper, decent amount. Plastics, on the other hand, could have filled up 13 hot tubs. I think not only does that speak for the longevity of plastics in the environment and the prevalence of plastics in the environment, but also for the biodegradability of paper products, which could potentially be used in some future outreach. Oh, let me explain the pictures. Top right here, we've got one of the barges taking some of the debris from Alpha Site over to where we were cataloging it. That was pretty neat to see. And then up top left here, we've got our main trash pile with just our mixed debris here, and a lot of wooden debris like lumber on this side with a Judy Hayner for scale. A lot of debris. And so, of course, I'm not going to go into all of the details and all the calculations and give you all the numbers, because that would be boring, but I will share some of the highlights with you. In the end, we collected over 3,500 plastic bottles and containers. We collected over 7,000 items from the food and beverage industry, regardless of material type, although it was majority plastic. Over 7,000 pounds of wood, mainly lumber and other construction wood, like 2x4s and pilings from docks and things like that. We mostly are thinking that was probably due to like Hurricane Katrina and other weather events that would have destroyed the actual structure. And then we actually were able to bring roughly 50% of the trash to a recycling facility. And some of it actually was being directly recycled into, I think it was cap and gown with graduation, and also some of the wood was being repurposed into tables. Really neat. So I'd like to point out, I'd like to point out this table right here, this graph. It's summarizing the quantity of debris per industry type. So we've got automotive, food and beverage, home and office, outdoor recreation, retail, tobacco, and then everything else, miscellaneous. And you can definitely see that there's one industry that is that dominates that. And it's going to be food and beverage industry, and that's due to the amount of single-use items. So a lot of styrofoam, cups, to-go boxes. You had your single-use silverware, straws, of course, we all know. So I don't think that this really comes as a surprise to anyone. But another thing is, even though the outdoor recreation category did not have an influence as far as abundance, it's still really important to remember the threat that a lot of like fishing lines and things like that can cause. So even though it wasn't that high of a number, any amount is very dangerous to wildlife. And then of course I've got some other pictures of some of the things we collected in our trash escapades. We've got some buoys and bobbers, got some, this is some industrial salt bags, rock salt, so that's typically used in the seafood preparation industry, which makes sense. And our little rainbow of lighters, some collection of light bulbs that had somehow survived, and a not disturbing plastic head. So what are the next steps? What's next? As I stated earlier, these results are going to be comparable across a large scale. So the escape trash assessment protocol is widely adjustable. So it's not just for a beach, it's not just for a marsh area. It can be applied to numerous different habitats and even areas with like stormwater runoff and things like that. So even like within a city. We're also working on sharing our data with some of our partners and other organizations that have similar goals. Specifically, a really big one is Mobile Bay National Estuary Program. They started a couple of really influential and big campaigns about trash, like Create a Clean Water Future, which then turned into Trash Blows, Stow It. They also did a Ditch the Disposables campaign in Pritchard, where they partnered with a local restaurant. That was their most recent one, and it's really, really fascinating. They completed it with surveys of some of the customers and their willingness to switch to a biodegradable to-go item rather than a plastic item, even though it would be a slightly higher cost. So we are definitely collaborating and sharing our information with them. I'm also in the process of communicating with NOAA and trying to get our data put on the marine debris tracker app, which is up here in this top right. It's a phone, if you aren't familiar with it, it's a phone app that lets you track debris that you find all over the world, and that data is being actively used. Next, we understand the need for reoccurring cleanups to keep the area tidy, as well as give us some long-term data. So while one cleanup is good and beneficial, it really, in order to keep the area clean, we do need to continue to monitor the site. It is a little bit challenging considering it is across some water. So even though there is a coastal cleanup in Bayou La Battery, there's not necessarily one for that site, just because of the difficulty in accessing it. So trying to brainstorm some ideas for a way to keep it clean is something that we're looking at. And that being said, even still, cleanups only address one of the symptoms of the bigger problem, and that issue is the source of marine pollution. So that's why some of the results of this assessment will also be used for community outreach purposes. And some of the things we are exploring are like public surveys, abatement campaigns, public education. And we're using this data based on some of the industry, some of the identifiable sources that we got from this study are going to help us in pinpointing the right audiences. And lastly, given the large amount of plastic prevalence and the numerous documented ingestion rates of wildlife with small plastics, we think it would be beneficial to assess the status of microplastics in Lightning Point or in Bayou La Battery, because it would almost definitely lead to some very good and intriguing finds and results. I can almost guarantee you there would be a quantifiable amount of microplastics. So thank you so much for listening. Without your support, I would not even be here. So I really appreciate it, and I will now take any questions or comments.
Hi, Caitlin. This is Olivia, and our board president, John Steiner, had to leave, but he left me with a question to ask you. Is what do you think will prevent just dumping, prevent people from dumping like they've done in the past?
So it's a difficult question, and I think that's sort of what everyone is really working to try and figure out, and that's why cleanups are so important. Even though it's not treating the cause of the issue, it still is helping, because really whenever it comes down to it, it's going to be a matter of changing a mindset that's been there for generations, that it just goes away, and that's really just not the case. And I think just education and teaching young people the effects of debris or anything that is not meant to go in the environment, any of our trash that ends up there, I really think you have to start there.
Caitlin, tell us the weirdest thing and the most disgusting thing that you found during your cleanup.
So y'all probably caught that weird plastic head. That was, we think it was like a Barbie, where they used to be able to braid the hair on it, but it no longer had the hair. So that was definitely one of the stranger things. We also were really, really perturbed by the amount of water bottles, plastic bottles that were filled with presumably urine. There were a terrifying amount of them. We assume that's just from either people on boats or people that are traveling that don't want to actually stop, and so they just have their bathroom to go and just toss it out. Don't know why you wouldn't just go outside, but yeah, there was a lot of those. We also found, Judy, I'm sure, is very proud of this. We found a couple like portable toilets, like that go on a boat or something like that. Yeah, we found I think 2 of those. Yeah, it is strange.
Well, we have a question from Art Dorman about the restaurant in Pritchard. Is there any, are there any restaurants in Biola Battery that are considering the same thing?
So really, that's what I'm heading toward. Unfortunately, COVID sort of happened during the worst possible time as we were brainstorming, reaching out to some of these businesses. But there's definitely, I have a couple places in mind that I think would definitely be good candidates. But it really is going to take a business that is actually willing to change and that actually, really cares. It's not going to be, a McDonald's or a gas station. Unfortunately, they've just got too much power basically over those chain businesses. But I've got a couple in mind that I think would really benefit from that.
Great. And Steve has a question for you. What is the source of the debris?
So definitely we think a lot of the larger like wood pieces, and like there was a bunch of like pieces of fragmented boats and construction stuff like that. We think a lot of that was due to extreme weather events. So Hurricane Katrina, other storm events. We also definitely just think it's stuff that people have been dumping anywhere up the bayou. It's all going to float down. And we think a lot of it is locally sourced. But of course, a lot of stuff can come from open ocean drifting as well. But the likelihood of it getting trapped up in there is not much.
Well, Caitlin, thank you so much. How long are you going to continue being an intern with us?
My contract ends August, September-ish. I'd have to look at the specific date, but yes, that is, as of now, how long I will be working with y'all.
Well, I don't know if we'll be able to shake your hand and thank you for all of your hard work physically, but know that virtually we really appreciate it, and your work is going to help us move forward, and perhaps it will help us to change the mindset of the folks that live and work in Alabama and take advantage of our wonderful coast. So it was great to have you. Thank you for your beautiful slides, and good luck and Godspeed.
Thank you.
Now, Nature Calls, it will, as I said, it'll feature a different area of Alabama's conservation work each week. And so next week, we have Elena Richards, who is our coordinator for the Locust Fork of the Black Warrior River watershed. So she'll take us on a tour of the Locust Fork, and that'll be next Thursday at 3 p.m. So all the people today on this Zoom call will receive an invitation to join us next week. And feel free to share that with interested friends or family. Or if you'd rather, you could send us people's emails and we will add them to our invitation list. So as you can see, conservation never stops. The work goes on even during the pandemic and when the rest of us are sheltering at home. So we need your financial support now more than ever so that we can keep our scientists and our conservation team out doing the work of conserving Alabama. So please make a gift today at support.nature.org/Alabama. Thank you so much.